Hey everyone, this is the Love of Cinema podcast. We like to talk movies. If you like to talk movies too, you come to the right place.
Utpal Dutt does come, he had a very respected background in theatre. He was also a very fine writer. He was something of an Anglophone figure. He was sort of steeped in Shakespeareana, and he did plays like that. And there's something about Gol Maal, the Gol Maal, apart from anything else, it also reminds you of the plays of Oscar Wilde, especially the importance of being earnest, which
Right,
which
right.
has which has which
That's
has
a
a
great
plot
point.
similarity, which has a plot similarity with Gol Maal.
Hey folks, this is Himanshu, and you're listening to the Love of Cinema podcast. Welcome back. On today's episode, we're going to chat about a film which holds a special place in the pantheon of great Hindi comedies, the man who made that film, and much more. But before that, in case you're a new listener, and if you like this episode, don't forget to check out past episodes of the podcast. You can find all old episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any of the other podcast apps. Love of Cinema podcast is a place for long-form, free-willing conversations centered around Indian cinema and streaming shows. So if you enjoy similar conversations, do consider subscribing. Also, please do rate and review the podcast in iTunes, as that will help others with similar taste discover this particular pod. So if you rate and review us, it will be much appreciated. And don't forget to share your favorite episode with your friends. Back to today's episode. Chances are, if I were to ask you to give me your top 5 Hindi comedies of all time, Hrishikesh Mukherjee's Gol Maal would make your list, and it would be for good reasons. I mean, how many times have you cracked up watching Amol Palekar pull off an absolute riot of a comedic performance? How many times have you rattled off Utpal Dutt's classic lines? And God knows how many times we have tripped over Pancham's timeless soundtrack, especially the anthem Aane Wala Pal. For the longest time, I wanted to do an episode on this delightful film, and I'm so glad that I finally got to do it. Independent writer Jai Arjun Singh, who mainly writes on cinema and literature, was kind enough to join us. Jai has written a wonderful book on Hrishida's films titled The World of Hrishikesh Mukherjee, and I thought he would make a great guest for this episode. Jai shared fabulous insights on Hrishida's style and approach to comedy, and drew interesting parallels with other films by the legendary filmmaker, especially the relatively underseen Hrishida film Biwi or Makan. Jai and I started our conversation listing some of our favorite comedies before segueing to Gol Maal, the recurring themes in Hrishida's films, the frequent muted socio-political commentary in his films, Utpal Dutt's theatre background, Rahi Masum Raza, who wrote the dialogues, and other things Gol Maal. So let's get right to it. Here's our chat. Hey Jay, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Himanshu. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. And I'm excited to have an expert Hrishida voice on the podcast so we can talk about one of my favorite films.
Right, it's great to be here, and I'm just as keen to hear what you feel about Gol Maal.
Yes, I would love to share that with you too.
Yeah.
So let's talk our all-time favorite Hindi comedies, Jay. I'll give you my top 5 comedies of all time, and
Okay.
then I would love to hear, yours. So here are my top 5, starting with the most recent. Priyadarshan's Hangama,
Right.
Rajkumar Santosh's Andaz Apna Apna,
Yeah.
Kundan Shah's Jaane Bhi Do Yaro, of course,
Yeah. Yeah.
Pankaj Parashar's Ab Aayega Maza,
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting choice. Yeah.
and of course Rishida's Gol Maal. And this
Okay.
is not to
So,
say
so, so
that
your
I'm not a
choices are
fan.
all fairly recent, I think. They're all
Yes,
in the last 40 years.
yes. And let me add before I switch it over to you that this is not to say that I'm not a fan of some of the older Kishore Kumar ones, like Half
Yeah.
Ticket and Chalti Ka Naam Badi or even Padosan. But these are just five which I would choose, if I had to choose five.
No, well, I could just go on and on and take up all the time for the podcast just talking about this. But uh, uh, the one thing I'd probably need to clarify is that I have a taste for all sorts of comedy, and I tend to have very eclectic taste generally as a film buff. So for instance, I like films that are dark satires, black comedies. I also like films that many people consider lowbrow, slapsticky. I
Same
have a
here,
taste for
same
those.
here.
I have a taste for every sort of thing. So what I could do is instead of we can come to Rishikesh Mukherjee a bit later, but two or three of my absolute favorite Hindi film comedies, which are not Rishikesh Mukherjee comedies. One is the film that you mentioned, Chalti Ka Naam Gaadi. It's a very cliched choice in some ways. So I won't say very much about it here, except to say that apart from the comic genius of Kishore Kumar, one of the things that really works very well for me in that film is how beautifully Madhubala plays the foil, the way she plays the straight guy, so to speak. And this is something that that Ashok Kumar also does very well.
Right.
That makes a very big difference to the you need a personality as lunatic as Kishore Kumar needs these straight men and straight women to bounce off. It really makes a big difference. One film I want to mention, which I don't know if you've even seen this film, and it's one that I keep recommending to people, especially people who tell me that Jaane Bhi Do Yaro was the first true dark satire that Hindi cinema had. And I have to tell them, no, I wish that were the case. But 30 years before Jaane Bhi Do Yaro, there was this 1952 film called Mr. Sampath, which was based on very loosely adapted from an R.K. Narayan novel. But
Right.
it's about a gentleman rogue played by Motilal, who spends all his time conning people and basically just slipping away whenever things get too hot. And one of the fascinating things about this film is that it was made in the early years of independence. A time that we look back at today very idealistically. We think of as a great time. It was a time of Nehruvian idealism and so on. But there's so much in this film that's very hard hitting about what was going on in society at the time. So, for instance, and there's one song there that has a lot of resonance with contemporary times. It's a song called "Achhe Din Aa Rahe Hain."
Right.
"Achhe Din Aa Rahe Hain," the hurrah, which of course, for obvious reasons, that has resonance today as well. And and they're very cynical in some ways about whether the Achhe Din will ever really come for poor people. And this is in 1952, which from our perspective today we tend to think of it as such an idyllic time in some ways, a time of the new dawn for the newly independent nation. And it's got some wonderful moments. It's got this. It's got a scene where a politician is making these rabble-rousing speeches and saying completely hypocritical things. It's got some wonderful
Right.
stuff in it.
Right.
So that's one. And just to lighten the tone a little bit, I would also like to say that coming back to what I said about having a taste for lowbrow comedies, one of my absolute favorite watch over and over again films of the last 15 years is No Entry. Anis
Oh
Bazmi's No
wow.
Entry, which which
You certainly caught me off guard there, Jay.
yeah, so this is the sort of film that serious, conscientious film critics are not supposed to be saying good things about. But I think it's an example of a truly lunatic comedy that is often in bad taste. It's often, it does things that people find ideologically problematic. But I think the performances by everyone from Anil Kapoor down to people who you don't even think of as very good actors normally. Somebody like Fardeen Khan, who is no one's idea of a good actor, he finds a role here that completely fits, his personality, and it works brilliantly. Lara Datta, I thought, was really good in the film, and it's a film that has a lot of repeat value as far as I'm concerned. So that's one. But yeah, maybe we should move on to the real subject of this podcast now.
Yes, yes, yes. And real quick, one film which I really like, which did not make my top five, but it's honorable mention, if you will, is Ek Chalis Ki Last Local, which I really dig.
Yeah, which unfortunately I have not seen, but
Oh,
yeah,
really? Okay, you
I have.
absolutely must. Yeah, yeah, it's a great film. I really like that film.
Yeah,
Okay. All right. So coming back to Gol Maal, Jai, let's talk about. I wanted to talk with you about. There's so much going on in Gol Maal. Gol Maal is about hustle. Everyone is trying to put in a hustle, right? Hustle is so to speak, a recurring motif in the film. Like Ram Prasad secures his job through hustle. Devan Verma convinces Mrs. Srivastav to pose as Ram Prasad's mom through emotional manipulation, which is essentially hustle.
yeah,
Uh, and I just tweeted out about this a couple of days ago, but that I thought who really pulled the greatest of the hustling moves was not Ram Prasad or Devan Verma or anybody else, but Ratna, because Ratna essentially hustled out a pair of gold earrings in addition to the sari from Mrs. Srivastava. And that
yeah,
was a really smooth move.
yeah,
So I thought that was a pretty damn good hustling move there.
yeah,
My favorite hustle bit, though, is about Dina Pathak making her way through the kitchen window.
yeah,
And that is so Rishida, in my opinion, because it has a slapstick element to it, but it also kind of spells out the whole motif of hustling with an actual kind of a moment of physical hustle.
yeah, yeah.
And
Right.
do you have any other instances of the motif of hustle in the film?
Well, I tend to think of it as, though it's just a matter of the words we use. I think there was this great tradition in a lot of the Hindi cinema of that time, and in what we call the middle cinema, and especially so in Rishikesh Mukherjee cinema, of what you might call the comedy of masquerade and disguise, where people are, for some reason or the other, some circumstances, pretending to be something that they are not, or they're putting on an act or a natak, and natak is always a key word in the Rishikesh Mukherjee universe anyway, and and that of course leads to a situational comedy, but it also leads to some very interesting treatments of the theme of identity, which is what, now the thing is, when one starts talking in a serious tone about films like Gol Maal or Chupke Chupke or whatever, sometimes you get accused of over analyzing or taking the fun away from what is meant to be a breezy, light-hearted comedy. But I think it's more complicated than that. I think any really good film will operate on multiple levels. And Golmaal, while it's a wonderfully breezy film, I think there are also some very uh, uh, obvious undercurrents that it has. So one of the things that happens with this comedy of masquerade that I'm talking about, one of the things that makes it so emotionally fulfilling, in addition to being funny, is that a character, in the process of pretending to be something or putting on a disguise, discovers new dimensions in his or her personality in the process of doing that. It's a version of what Shakespeare used in the Forest of Arden, and it's something that it definitely runs through Golmaal, because one of the what you call hustle, of course, also applies to the film. But one of the things I find really interesting is Amol Palekar, in one interview, I've forgotten where it was, he said that in Golmaal he actually plays a triple role. He's it's not a double role. Now of course, technically speaking, it's just a single role, because Ram Prasad is just one man. Actually, it's not a double
Right.
role. But he said it's a triple role, because you have Ram Prasad, the ideal employee, this completely po-faced serious guy who only has that one dimension to his personality, and you have this Lakshman Prasad, this character that he makes up, his twin brother, who's exactly the opposite. He's completely all about just having fun and being irresponsible. And then the third person is the real Ram Prasad, who contains both these characters inside him. He is a serious, conscientious worker, but he also, he's also capable of having fun. He wants to go out with his friends, go to matches, do things like that.
Just a
And
regular guy, right?
yeah, absolutely. And one of the subtexts of the film, which I find very interesting, is that, and this is true of so much of Rishikesh Mukherjee's other cinema as well, that we all contain multitudes. You don't someone like Bhavani Shankar, the reason why he is the antagonist in this film, even though he's a very funny character himself, played by Utpal Dutt, uh, is that he's got these very rigid ideas about what people should be like. So so if a person is serious, he is only allowed to be that. He must not have another side to his personality, or there would be a complete rogue like Lakshman Prasad. Bhavani Prasad doesn't recognize that the same person can have these 3 or 4 different dimensions to his personality. And that is a very interesting part of it. And I think what you said about the Dina Pathak character, for instance, even though she has to be hustled into putting on that performance by Deven Verma, doing that Senti act, eventually, when she does put on that performance, she also finds emotional fulfillment in the performance. Because the Dina Pathak character, it's been a very long time since I've watched the film, but if I remember right, her daughter in the film has gone abroad or something like that.
Yes,
And,
yes.
and 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 she hasn't seen her in a long time. So in the process of putting on this performance, pretending to be Ram Prasad's mother, and that, and having a son and daughter, she fulfills a certain gap that she feels as well in her own life. And that is the serious subtext of what is otherwise a very funny subplot.
Right, right. And it's interesting what you said about Bhavani Shankar, because I think Golmaal is also a critique of preconceived notions. And the two characters, Bhavani Shankar, who's been, shackled by his old school kind of rigid, judgmental ways,
Yeah.
and Ram Prasad, who's a young man, with happy-go-lucky, carefree ways. And the film is kind of a coming-of-age tango of sorts between
Yeah.
these two men.
Yeah.
And so that's also a very interesting part about Gol Maal.
That's a very nice way of putting it. Yeah, a coming of age tango between these two men, and again, it's you if you really think about it, and I know we are talking about comedy here primarily, but if you look at Rishikesh Mukherjee's universe, you have that sort of tango between two opposite sorts of characters in many other films. Look at Anand. Look at the Rajesh Khanna character in Anand, and the Bachchan character Babu Moshai, who's completely, who's just gutted by the state of the world and very cynical right from the first scene. And then this man Anand, who is dying, who has a terminal illness, but who also has a tremendous sense of fun, and he has a sense of make believe, and he ends up, so much of the film is about that personality clash between these two men, and what you call the tango, the coming of age tango. That is very much a theme of Rishikesh Mukherjee's work, both the comedy and the more serious films, I think.
Right, right. And another trademark style of Hrishida that we see in Golmaal is, this delightful mix of slapstick, subtle, and then everything in between. It kind of spans the complete range of the comedy, so to
Yeah,
speak. An
yeah,
example of a wonderful slapstick bit would be when Utpal Dutt is reviewing the list of the applicants with Yunus Parvez.
yeah.
And after asking him to cross out Vicky Malhotra's name, he says, Aage bado. And Yunus Parvez literally moves forward, almost headbutting into Utpal Dutt. And
Yeah,
that says exasperatingly, pointing to the list of applicants, yeah, aage bado. So
yeah,
that's like a slapstick bit. But there are also examples of subtle bits. And, an example of subtle bit would be, which I really am fond of, is when Ram Prasad's friend, I forgot the character name, but when he, at the picnic, he declares that he can only take one more person with him and Ram Prasad to the hockey game.
yeah.
And rest of the friends start screaming foul. And one of them even says, down with personality cult. which is an
Yeah,
obvious
yeah.
reference to,
To the
Mrs. Gandhi.
emergency and the
Right.
Indira, yeah,
And that's followed by a not so subtle bit again, this time hinting at the emergency, like you said, which was lifted probably 2 years ago before this. This is 79, right? So
yeah,
I think emergency was lifted in 77.
yeah,
Where the friend with the tickets to the game says, emergency हटाने का ये मतलब नहीं कि आप लोग जो चाहे मनमानी शुरू कर दे.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so, it kind of spans the whole range of comedy. And I thought this is, again, a recurrent theme in Hrishida's films, right? There is something for everybody, like you said. If you like slapstick, there are going to be those bits. And there is something in between, where you will have to kind of join the subtext and figure out.
yeah, yeah. That's true. I would sort of add the caveat that on the whole, I think Rishikesh Mukherjee was a little more comfortable with the non-slapsticky, the more subtle sort of humor. Because if you look at the whole body of his work, 42
Right,
films
right,
as I have done while working on my book about him, uh, on the whole, what you find is that the most enriching comedies and the most enriching scenes in the comedies tend to be the ones that feature the more subtle actors like Deven Verma, who was an absolute master of what you call the shabd fake tradition in Marathi theatre, where you're just sort of saying something in a very unobtrusive way, often with a poker face, but it's hilariously funny. And so Deven Verma, to my mind, is one of the archetypal Rishikesh Mukherjee actors in comedy. David Abraham, the wonderful actor,
yeah,
he's another
absolutely.
one. Of course, Rishikesh Mukherjee also used Asrani a great deal, and Asrani is perhaps a slightly more flamboyant sort of comedian. But even he has those real that subtlety in his gestures that can really enrich a scene, even if he's just somewhere in the background. So if a song is going on, like in Chupke Chupke, and Asrani is sitting there munching on a piece of pastry, you know your eye will be drawn to him rather than Sharmila Tagore singing. And so I think on the whole, Rishikesh Mukherjee was probably a little more comfortable with that sort of comedy. But since you brought this subject up, I also want to just say, and I won't go on about this too much right now. Maybe we'll talk about it later. But one of my absolute favorite Rishikesh Mukherjee comedies, and a film that very few people even today know about, is a film that has a lot of slapstick in it, and it's wonderful slapstick. It's a 1965 film called Bibi or Makan, which was perhaps Rishikesh Mukherjee's first comedy. I mean, a first film that was an all-out comedy. Again, it's a comedy of masquerade. It's about five uh, young men who are finding it very difficult to find accommodation, being single men. So they end up playing this cross-dressing thing, where two of them dress up as women and pretend to be wives of two of the others, and then they sort of, they go in, and that sounds like a very lowbrow situation for a comedy, but it's a delightful film. It's an operatic film. It uses music brilliantly, Hemant Kumar's music score, and it's got wonderful slapsticky performances by people like Mehmood and Keshto Mukherjee, but it's very well done. So that would be an example of what you're talking about, Rishikesh Mukherjee's versatility when it came to comedy. That he could that his frame could accommodate someone like Deven Verma, but could also accommodate someone like Mehmood or someone like
Right.
Keshto Mukherjee, who are all very different sorts of comedians.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I've never seen, unfortunately, Bibi or Makan, but I do know about it because the most successful Marathi film of all time is
Yes,
essentially a riff on that, Ashi
yes,
Hi Banwa Banvi.
made by Sachin.
Yes, made by Sachin Pilgaonkar. So I am aware of the film. I haven't seen it, unfortunately. I'll definitely try to seek it out. There's also often, we spoke about this, but just to kind of bring it back home, there's also often considerable muted commentary on socio-economic issues and zeitgeist of the time, none of which is didactic or sermonizing in any way.
Yeah,
But Rishida, certainly, there seems to be this recurrent theme in his films, like, for example, you could read the whole interview sequence as commentary on the high unemployment in the 70s. And in the climax, there is also a swipe at Morarji Desai
Yeah.
and his urine therapy by way of Keshto Mukherjee's wonderful cameo at the end. By the way, what a wonderful cameo. It has to be one
Yes,
of the best
yes.
cameos in the
Yeah,
in
yes,
the history of
absolutely.
him.
It's great. It's great. Yeah. No, what you're saying that's very true, and in fact, again, coming back to what I said earlier, in a slightly defensive, self-conscious way, that it should be possible to discuss the serious undercurrents of even a film like Gol Maal without taking away any of the fun of the film. It should be possible to talk about the fact that the film has an emotional depth as well. Now, where does that emotional depth come from? In my view, it comes from the fact whatever emotional investment that a viewer feels in Gol Maal comes from the fact that very early on we meet Ram Prasad and his sister, uh, played by Amol Palekar and Manju Singh, two very likable young people who are orphaned, and we know, the assumption of the film and the social milieu that it's set in is such that Ram Prasad has the onus on him that he's entering the working environment for the first time, and he has to earn a livelihood to provide for himself and for his unmarried sister. Now, what's creating a problem here is that the man who has employed him, Bhavani Shankar, has these very hidebound notions about what young people of integrity
Hmm.
must look like, what they must behave like. So there's always this undercurrent throughout the film that Ram Prasad, for no fault of his own, even though he's a serious employee, a serious worker, he might end up losing his job because this man has such rigid ideas about what young people should be like. And that is the serious foundation on which Golmaal, the wonderful frothy comedy, is built. And I would make the case again without trying to make the film sound pedantic, at which it, like you pointed out, it is absolutely not a pedantic film. I would point out that the film gets its emotional depth from the fact that we feel for these characters to begin with. We feel for Ram Prasad and his sister, and that is what really keeps us with the story. And this, too, by the way, to some degree, is also true of Bibi or Makan, the film that I mentioned just now, because there again you have five very likable young men who are in danger of not being able to, make a livelihood in the big city, not be able to find accommodation. And so even though it's a very frothy film in its actual treatment and execution, that subtext is always there, that these are characters we care about, and
Right.
we have some emotional investment in them.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point you made about the characters because if you don't connect with the characters, the film's going to fall flat. And I think essentially a good comedy requires three things, right? It requires, like you said, good characters, decent actors portraying those characters, delivering good lines and with good timing. And what classic lines we have in this film, thanks to Rahi Masum Raza. And I would love to hear you talk about Raza for a bit. But if I were just to rattle out some of the famous lines and some of the beloved lines from this film, जिसका नाम भवानी शंकर हो वो तो पैदा होते ही बुढ़ा हो गया. Just simple lines, but they pack so much punch.
Yeah, yeah,
And then
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
मुझे तो ये पता भी नहीं था कि मोती काला भी होता है. मैं तो समझता था कि मोती केवल श्वेत वर्णीय होता है. And the absolute classic Utpal Dutt line is तुम्हारी शादी उससे नहीं होगी जिससे तुम प्रेम करती हो. तुम्हारी शादी उससे होगी जिससे मैं प्रेम करता हूँ.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
Jay,
absolutely.
what can you tell us
That's a
about Rai
that,
Masum Raza and
that's
the
an
line?
absolute laugh out loud one. Yeah, and the way he delivers the line, that's so important.
Yes, yes, he is just excellent. I mean, he was a great actor, no doubt. But yeah, this is just his, knockout performance.
जिसकी मूछ साफ होती है उसका मन साफ नहीं होता. That's another one.
There's always a theory. He is always ready with a theory.
Yeah. जो अपना नाम शॉर्ट कर दे वो काम भी छोटा करेगा. So yeah, so it's all about yeah, these very rigid ideas about life. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Jay, what can you tell us about the writer Rahi Masum Raza?
Well, again, I'm not going to pretend to know a great deal about him, but it's
Okay.
interesting again that uh, he was one of a number of writers that Rishikesh Mukherjee drew upon in the 1960s and 1970s. Other obvious names included Sachin Bhaumik, who also worked on this film, Gulzar Saab, who started off writing lyrics for Rishikesh Mukherjee. In fact, the first time he did it, Gulzar wrote lyrics for Rishikesh Mukherjee was in Bibi or Makan, coming back to that film. But then subsequently became a dialogue writer as well. Rajendra Singh Bedi, people like that. So Rishikesh Mukherjee drew on all these writers at various times, and very often the films that were made during this period, because he was usually working on 2 or 3 films simultaneously. Very often they would have these fairly informal addas at his house, where they would be working on 2 or 3 films simultaneously with the same sets of writers, tossing ideas around, thinking up little things that could go into this film,
It's like
which
their
would
way of
perhaps not.
jamming together.
Yeah, jamming, exactly. That's what it was, and of course there tends to be a lot of criticism today of that method of working also, because today Hindi cinema has become much more organized. Back in the 60s and 70s, it was infamous that there were rarely ever any bound scripts. So actors would show up on the sets and they would be given their dialogues on the day itself, which obviously doesn't sound like a very professional way of working. Today things are much more professional in obvious ways, but there's also something, I think, to be said about the adda style of working, where you're just getting together and just tossing ideas around together. And I think Rai Masum Raza was a big part of that as well. It's interesting because he I read a book that the translation of a book that Rahi Masum Raza wrote in the 1970s. It's called Scene 75. It was the translation. It was translated into English by Poonam Saxena, and it came out just a few years ago. And that book is very interesting because it's an often scathing sort of look at the film industry itself. So he's often very caustic about aspects of the film industry, and especially how the film industry tends to treat its writers.
Hmm.
Uh, so
It's a
so
fictional account, right? It's a novel, right?
it's a novel. It's a
Right.
novel, but he probably drew on some of his personal experiences as well. So there's one thing that struck me. I actually have it written somewhere out here that he uh, what talked about earlier about the comedy of masquerade, the comedy of pretense. A lot of that is happening in this novel as well. So in this novel, there's one scene where a bill collector who gets paid just something like 190 rupees a month, he pretends to be a sales supervisor who is earning many times more than that. And then he has to keep lying to compound his initial lie. He has to keep lying further. Then then there's one line where one man plays 3 separate roles. He's a homeopathic doctor, and he's a writer, and he's a husband. And there's one line in the book that goes, all 3 were full-time jobs, but Gupta ji did them in such a way that none of the 3 knew about the others. So you have that as a line in the book, and that again is really, it ties in with the pretense and masquerade theme in Gol Maal as well, and
Yeah, absolutely.
some of the other films that Rahi Masum Raza scripted. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot going on. It's sometimes very difficult to look at these films and to be able to pinpoint precisely कि कि इसमें राइटर का कितना कंट्रीब्यूशन था, डायरेक्टर का कितना कंट्रीब्यूशन था. Now I have just given you an example of a Rai Masum Raza novel which had a similar theme with Golmaal, but then there are also many Rishikesh Mukherjee films over 40 years which have many recurring themes. So it's easy to conjecture that some of those themes were dear to Rishikesh Mukherjee's heart as well. So I think there definitely was a collaborative process when it came to the making of these films.
Right, right. And The lines are such a big part of this film. I mean, that this is not to take away from the wonderful performances or the direction or the story itself. Let's talk about Utpal Dutt for a minute. Of course, like I said, a prolific actor, but Bhuvan Shom and Gol Maal are probably the two that you first think of when you think of Utpal Dutt.
Yeah,
How
at
big of
least
a
in
fact?
Hindi cinema. Yeah, yeah,
Yes, in Hindi
yeah.
cinema. How big of a factor, in your opinion, was Utpal Dutt's casting as Bhavani Shankar in making the film what it is?
Huge, huge, absolutely huge. It's right up there with anything else in the film. It's almost unimaginable. To if you try to picture someone else in the role, I think it's he's just made for it, and it's also interesting because uh, Utpal Dutt does come. He had a very respected background in theatre. He was also a very fine writer. He was something of an Anglophone figure. He was sort of steeped in Shakespeareana, and he did plays like that. And there's something about Gol Maal. The Gol Maal, apart from anything else, it also reminds you of the plays of Oscar Wilde, especially the importance of being earnest, which
Right,
which
right.
has which has which
That's a
has a
great
plot
point.
similarity, with Gol Maal. And again, talking about the comedies of pretense and disguise, the works of P.G. Wodehouse, for instance. Now, Hrishikesh Mukherjee, I knew, and many other directors and writers who worked in Hindi cinema at that time used to read the novels of P.G. Wodehouse and were definitely inspired by that world. So I feel like someone like Utpal Dutt, who came from a somewhat anglicized background, uh, would in some ways would just sort of would fit into this sort of thing, this sort of scenario fairly well. I think he would also understand the particular sort of madcap comedy that is required. Even though the dialogues are in Hindi, even though all the sentences that he's speaking in the film are in Hindi, there is that sensibility which ties in with Oscar Wilde and P.G. Wodehouse. So I think that also made a difference somewhere. But yeah, it's a terrific performance. It's an absolutely brilliant performance, and he and Amol Palekar work so well together. Even someone like Bindya Goswami, who gets overlooked and who was very young in the, she is so good in,
He did a great
she
job.
she
Yeah.
she completely holds her own in the scenes between her and Utpal Dutt, where she's sort of being the daughter who's a little irritated with this hidebound dad of hers. And she says, that you have that line, I'm nattaking, dad, I'm nattaking. मैं नाटक कर रही हूँ, because when she plays a character who's pregnant, and he's shocked by it. So I think a lot of things just came together beautifully in this film.
And so you think Utpal Dutt's kind of classical theater, or maybe not classical, modern theater pedigree kind of helped in elevating his performance in this film?
I think so. I think it would have, if nothing else, it would have given him, a finger on the pulse of the particular sort of comedy that was going on here. So for instance, I can give you an analogy.
Sure.
When Jaane Bhi Do Yaro was being made, uh, Nasiruddin Shah famously had many problems working with the absurdist comedy of Jaane Bhi Do Yaro. He was very unhappy during most of the shoot. Later, of course, he admitted very generously that he was wrong about a lot of things, but he had a problem with some of the absurdism of the situations. Now, Om Puri, on the other hand, uh, found it much easier to slip into the world of Jaane Bhi Do Yaro because he had performed on stage. Om Puri had performed in plays by Molière, the playwright, who worked in a similarly absurdist vein. So
Fashion,
I think
yeah.
so Om Puri had some experience of that sort of theater. So he found it easier to just get into the Jaane Bhi Do Yaro lunacy, the mode of lunacy that is required for it. Whereas Nasir found it a little more difficult because he was very firmly stuck in the serious actor mold at that point in his career, and he was just finding it difficult to even do scenes like the two telephone scenes where he and Satish Kaushik are on the phones, but they are talking to each other, but they're in the same room. So that's one example. So I think Utpal Dutt, what I really meant to say was, like you rightly said, because he had some sort of rootedness in a certain sort of modern English theatre as well, including comic theatre, he would have probably got his finger on the pulse of Bhavani Shankar quite fast.
And so many interesting bits and anecdotes about this film, and I would love to hear. I'm pretty sure you know much more than I do. I just made a quick list of some of the interesting bits, at least in my opinion. And feel free to add anything that you can to some of these. So, for example, Palekar beat Bachchan to the best actor at film fairs that year, spoiling Bachchan's chances for a hat trick, having won the award for Dawn and. Of course, Marakbar Anthony, the previous 2 years. And I would like to believe that film fairs were of much more repute during that time, right, than what they are today.
Well, I don't know. I think in the early 70s there was a lot of mark around the film fairs. In fact, Rishi Kapoor in his recent autobiography very openly and candidly admitted that he had bought his Filmfare Award for Bobby in
Oh, that's
1973.
right. Yeah, I remember reading that.
And
Yeah.
and in 1972 there was that travesty which everybody still laughs about today, where this Manoj Kumar starrer called Beeman, which quite intriguingly titled Beeman, which almost nobody knows today. It swept the awards, and everybody on the inside knows that the awards were bought that year. In fact, Pran Saab refused his award for Beeman because he felt that it was a travesty that Pakiza didn't get the award for the best music score. So I'm not really sure. Maybe in the late 70s, the film fairs were going through a period of comparative integrity. I don't know, but yeah, but I have to say, giving Amol Palekar the award was a great decision. It's something
Oh,
that I'm
yes.
a
Yes.
I think it was a terrific decision.
Yes.
So.
And we
Uh,
must add that Bachchan was actually nominated for Kala Patthar, which is just a damn solid performance.
It's a
So,
wonderful performance. In fact, I was going to come to that. I wasn't sure about this because you've obviously researched this more than I have. That I love Bachchan in Kala Patthar, and he also had a few other films that year. He probably had The Great Gambler and a couple of others. But
yeah,
yeah, I think it's again, competitive awards should be taken with a pinch of salt anyway. But I think it's great that Palekar got it that year, because again he was always somewhat under the radar anyway as an actor. He was seen as one of the middle cinema actors. Not really, he wasn't part of the mainstream as such. So it's great that, and Golmaal did very well at the box office as well. It did supremely well.
true. Yeah. And do
Yeah.
you think Palekar's performance stacks up as his best?
I haven't. It's not like I've seen all his performances, but it may
One
be
of the
the
best, right?
best that I've ever seen him.
Right.
It might be the best that I've ever seen him, only because I think he showed a knack for comedy in this film that is definitely more pronounced than at least the other films that I've seen of his.
Right.
So I've seen him in slightly more subdued roles in films like Rajnikanda or Choti Si Baat or films like that. But yeah, this is certainly the one that where he really seems to be having a lot of fun. I think
Right.
that is which is something that you have to give an actor credit for. Yeah, I think Golmaal was the first film he did with Rishikesh Mukherjee, the first of four films. I think he
Right.
did with Mukherjee, 4 or 5 films. But he had worked with Basu Chatterjee in quite a few films, and yeah, so he was quite well established in what we call the middle cinema.
Right. Right.
But of course, those were not films that were ever blockbusters or anything like that.
Right. By the way, one Amol Palekar performance which I really like is from Khamosh, which is
Oh yes,
fairly
yes, yes.
against the grain, and
Yes,
you
no,
know,
no. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was another performance that also showed a sense of humor. I think they were all having a lot of fun during the making of that film, because it's a meta film, and it was made by many of the same people who had made Jahnavi Do Yaaro the previous
right,
year.
right,
Because here Kundan Shah was assisting Vidhu Vinod Chopra. The previous year, Vidhu Vinod Chopra had assisted Kundan Shah on Jahnavi Do Yaaro,
right,
and they had a lot. Amol Palekar, of course, was not part of the Jahnavi Do Yaaro team, but everybody had a lot of fun making Khamosh.
and I one of the things I love to do is always look at the unit, the crew of a film, and kind of see what they did from there on. And Bharat Rangachari was the assistant director on this film. And, Rangachari obviously would go on to make some fairly popular action dramas in the 90s, like Khatarnak with Sanjay Dutt and one of the many Hindi riffs on Godfather, Zulm Hukumat. I also recently found out that Mr. Rele, who studied Ram Prasad's sites during his interview, was a real guy. He taught sociology at Berkeley during 70s and 80s.
Oh, nice. So you've done a lot of research on this film. I
So,
mean,
so
yeah.
this was credit where it's due. This was actually sent to me by one of my Twitter followers, so the credit should go to him. I'd heard about this. I always thought that that was a joke, but apparently he did teach at Berkeley during 70s and 80s, and he was a sociology professor. So that was also an interesting bit I found. And
Yeah.
these next two things, Jay, I would love to hear about these from you. Now, the great background music, there is no way I'm going to be able to hum it, but this was essentially sampled from a song from Ek Phool Char Kaate, Sambal Ke Karna Jo Bhi Karna. And I believe the music is by Shankar Jaikishan, and the background music of Gol Maal is essentially sampled from that tune.
Okay.
And
Okay. You've caught me in something that I actually did not know, and part of the reason for that is that the Rishikesh Mukherjee book is not really a very heavily research-driven book. It's or an anecdote-driven book. It's mainly analytical.
okay,
So there's a lot of stuff. A lot of the backstories around the films are things that I didn't really glean. But
okay.
yeah, that's you're talking about the music that comes with the opening titles, right?
No, it's like that. I don't know if I should call it the theme, but it plays when the first time Lakshman Prasad, Amol Palekar posing as Lakshman Prasad makes his way to Bhavani Shankar's residence, and it
Right.
plays throughout the movie. And if you listen to the song, I
Yeah,
can send you
I
the
think
link.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Right,
So
right. And I was just
but
wondering,
I didn't know
why
about.
was there a reason why Rishikesh Mukherjee decided to use that, or was it just a favorite songs of his or something? I was trying to think, why he would sample.
This is something unfortunately I don't know anything about.
Okay,
Uh, in fact, the many people who have written about R.D. Burman's career might know a little more about this actually. Uh, but yeah, that's an interesting bit of trivia. I'll look it up.
sure,
I
sure.
What I can tell you is that certainly there were these little bits and pieces that were taken from earlier films in terms, at least in terms of soundtracks or snatches of soundtracks that were taken from earlier films. But the cases that I can think of are cases where the music directors were the same. So, for instance, BB or Makan, coming back to BB or Makan for the fourth or fifth time now, it has this wonderful music score by Hemant Kumar. But the very first song in that film is the tune. The tune is taken from a Bengali film made a few
Mm,
years earlier that starred Kishore Kumar, and the music director for that film was also Hemant Kumar. So Hemant Kumar basically just took his own tune, and there might have been some permissions involved, but but yeah, this I don't really know about cases of using tunes that were from earlier films by other music directors.
okay. And the song "Aane Wala Pal," an absolute Pancham anthem,
Yeah,
and super lyrics, obviously by Gulzar.
yeah.
I think I read one of your blogs where you mentioned this song. I think it was your blog. I might be mistaken, but did you write a blog on this?
I
Okay.
did, and I did mention the song as well. Yeah,
Yes, yes. Could you share what you wrote on that blog about this song?
yeah. What I was mainly saying there was that you there's a little contradiction somewhere where the Utpal Dutt character Bhavani Shankar, he you know he believes that life needs to be lived in very carefully regimented stages. So when you're young, you have to concentrate on studies and career at the exclusion of everything else. Later, there'll be time for for other things. But There's also when Aane Wala Pal starts, you have the lyric that goes, I have the lyric here, in fact, एक बार वक्त से लम्हा गिरा कहीं, वही वहां दास्तान मिली लम्हा कहीं नहीं. And the lyrics are rooted in the idea that you should live life as fully as possible. And because even the happiest of moments will be past soon, and who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So live as fully as you can today. And what's interesting about that sequence is that these lyrics are actually a counterpoint to what Bhavani Shankar himself believes. He's got a much more rigid idea about how you should forget about having fun now. First, sort of do your work, etc.
Right.
But when Amol Palekar is singing that song to Bindya Goswami, you have a shot of Bhavani Shankar sipping his tea in another room in the house, and he's swaying his head appreciatively, and he's really swept along by the music. So it's almost as if for one moment, uh, the music of R.D. Burman and the lyrics of Gulzar Saab and the singing of Kishore Kumar, they have opened up Bhavani Shankar's heart in a way, and no, he's opened his mind to a worldview that he otherwise doesn't believe in. But yeah, so that philosophy, I think, is also very much part of the film, that you should live as fully as you can in the present moment. So it's not a case of a song sequence just being artificially inserted into a film that has no connection with the film's narrative. Otherwise, it's a song that, as you said, it's a very beautiful song at the level of music and lyrics, but it's also very organic to the philosophy of Gol Maal as a film.
Right, right. Interesting. Yeah, it's a great song, just as a song. But like you said, there is subtext to it. And an interesting point you made about how it kind of goes counter to the character of Bhavani Shankar. And there are some interesting shots about him in the song too, right? I think the first version is kind of you see him pacing around in the house listening to the song
Yeah,
while Amol Palekar is singing upstairs. All
yeah.
right, gun to head, Jay, team Chupke Chupke or team Golmaal?
Normally I would probably say Gol Maal. The thing that makes it difficult for me is that I have this very sentimental thing about how Chupke Chupke has my favorite my absolute two favorite actors when I was growing up. Though of course they were together in a slightly better known film that made that same year called Sholay. So I have this thing, I think Dharmendra is fabulous in Chupke Chupke. He's so good. Bachchan of course has a smaller role, but he's very good as well. Uh, if it's gun to head and I have to absolutely pick one, I'd probably pick Golmaal. But
Okay.
then there will also be a caveat which says that my favorite Rishikesh Mukherjee comedy is still BV or Makan.
Yes, yes, yes. By the way, is that streaming anywhere? Is there a decent print on YouTube?
There's no decent print. I think that the last I saw there was a print on YouTube.
Okay.
I don't know if it's decent or not. It wasn't very good when I saw it. But you can try it out, and I'm sure some of the spirit of the film will definitely come across to you.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I also feel if you haven't seen it before, when you see it, you will see pre-echoes of Golmaal in that film. It was made 14 years before Golmaal. It's
Right,
got it does anticipate films like Golmaal to some degree.
right, right, right. And that brings us to a small, a tiny, a really small pop quiz that I have for you on Golmaal, which is just one question. But this is going to test how keenly you've seen some of the scenes from the movie. Are you ready?
I'm going to fail this. I can tell you now
No,
because
by the way, I should tell you that I just happened to notice this, few days ago too. So this is just a fun thing.
yeah.
So roughly around what time does Ram Prasad's interview take place?
Oh God, I'm sorry. I have no idea.
Okay.
I've, I'm a very bad chronicler of Rishikesh Mukherjee's best known films. I think I spent a great deal of my time dealing with the more obscure films in that book. but,
Right.
but when it comes to films like Gol Maal and Chupke Chupke, I'm pretty bad with the trivia. Tell
Okay.
me, what time is it?
It's roughly 11:35. There are a couple of shots which are show the clock.
They are clock shots. Okay,
Yes,
okay.
yes. There are a couple of
Oh,
clock shots, prominent clock
oh.
shots. And second question is when Kesto Mukherjee's small cameo, he's wearing a T-shirt that has the name of a zodiac sign. Um, which zodiac sign is it?
Okay, this is something I used to know, and I'm cheating right now, and I'm actually looking at my book, but
That's fine.
I
It's
can't
a
find it because see, this is what it's mentioned in the book. I have mentioned this in the book, what Keshto's T-shirt says,
right.
and they just caught up with me, and I've completely forgotten.
It's Gemini.
Gemini. Oh, right, yeah. No, but there's also something else. There's something that's on the back of the T-shirt. I think that
Oh, okay. I've missed that.
which yeah, because it's there's something there's definitely a point that I was making in the book about what the T-shirt says, but I'm going to look it up and get back
Sure,
to you.
sure. Let me know, and I'll add it in the notes for the episode. Oh,
And so
by the
this
way,
thought about
any
having
other anecdotes or anything which you would like to share that we haven't touched upon?
uh, anecdotes, I don't know. See, one thing to know about Rishikesh Mukherjee, about the last 10, 15, 20 years of his career, is that he had these physical problems. You know, he had a bad case of gout, which often kept him bedridden. Uh, and a lot of the films that he directed from the 1970s onwards were directed while he was basically sitting in bed. You know, he couldn't move around a great deal. So this also dictated some of the choices of the subject matters that he dealt with. So he tended to make a lot of films where most of the action happened indoors, within a house, and very often he used his own house to shoot a lot of the indoor scenes. So many of the indoor scenes in Golmaal are actually shot in Rishikesh Mukherjee's own Bandra house,
Bandra residence, right?
which is on Carter Road, and so little things like, there would just be, his brother-in-law was an art designer, and they would just put up different sorts of posters or things on the walls of this room to give it a certain sort of character in keeping with what is going on in the room. They would do things like that. Uh,
We see
it was
that in Bindya Goswami's room, right? She has a lot of pop culture kind of posters,
right, yeah.
Elvis, and yeah.
There's also a Dennis the Menace poster on the wall in one place, which I think was actually just there in Rishikesh Mukherjee's house, and they just kept it there. And there are also the filmmaking was fairly laid back in many ways. So Deven Verma told me when I met the late Deven Verma while researching for the book, he told me that the film was made in this very casual way. The people would uh, bring their own clothes from home, for a particular sort of shoot. Uh, uh, the he was told when there had to be a shot of his car in the film, Devin Verma's car. I think it's a Fiat. Rishikesh Mukherjee told him, just bring your own car to the set. Bring your own car, and we'll use that. So that's how these fairly low budget films were made back then. And Rishikesh
Right.
Mukherjee tended to finish making films within 30 to 45 days. You
Hmm.
know, it didn't normally take more time than that. Even a film like Anand, made in 1970, which was a fairly high profile film at the time, it was shot in a total of 30 days. It took
Right.
just 30 days to shoot it, and this despite Rajesh Khanna's notorious unpunctuality.
Right. Right. Did Rishida make any Bengali films?
He did not. He ghost directed one Bengali film for Biswajit.
Hmm.
Biswajit, the actor
Okay.
who had produced a film, which was it's a film called, if I remember rightly, Choto Jigyasa. Choto Jigyasa, which was
Okay.
made in the 1960s. The original director, that there was some follower. Bishwajit had produced the film, and the film, in fact, this is interesting trivia because if you know the Bengali actor Prasenjit,
Yeah.
who is Bishwajit's son.
Right.
Prasenjit was a child actor in this film. This is in the 1960s, and Biswajit had produced the film, and there was some falling out with the original director of the film. So Rishikesh Mukherjee stepped in to help complete the film.
Okay.
And this is something that Biswajit told me, and I met Biswajit ji in Bombay in 2013 or 2014. He told me this that Rishikesh Mukherjee just did this pro bono. He just completed the film for me. It was the only Bengali film that he directed, and he didn't take payment for it or anything like that.
I see. I see. Great, great. Jay, well, once again, thanks a lot. This was a great chat, and I'm really glad I could have you on the podcast. Like I said, to talk about one of my favorite films.
No, thanks a lot for having me here. It's been a very nice refresher course for me because at the current moment you know a great deal more about Gol Maal than I do.
No, you're just being too kind. But
Yeah.
thanks a lot again, and someday I would love to do something similar about Janavi Doyaro with you for the
Yeah, absolutely. Any time.
another
This has been a
film
lot of
which,
fun. Yeah.
yeah, that film is just
And when
another.
it comes to Jaane Bhi To Yaro, I will be able to give you far more anecdotes
Oh,
because because
great,
because that
great.
because
Okay,
because that is an anecdote-driven book. The book
right.
is entirely about the making of the film. So it's got all these fascinating stories about some of the stuff that happened while the film was being made.
Thank you so much, Jay.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Hope you liked our chat. It's always a good time to revisit this gem of a comedy. So if you wish to revisit, it streams on Netflix. If you have a comment, suggestion, or anything which you would like to add to the conversation held on the episode, do drop me a comment on Twitter. Also, do subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, and do drop us a review. You can follow me on Twitter at loveofcinemasf8 for podcast-related updates and my tweets on all things movies. That's all I got. This is Himanshu, signing off, and like always, thank you for listening to the Love of Cinema podcast.